Hello gamers, Powered Heal here, and today we are finally going to take a look at the WoW Classic community project. So this was, I think, dropped like a week or so ago. There's a bunch of hype behind it. When I first saw it, I was like, what is this? Is this another private server? But it's not a private server. It's actually a website that's kind of tied in with Discord, and the goal seems to be to provide a place for people to vote on survey topics related to Classic Plus. And then beyond that, there's a kind of forum type of thing where you can make posts. They can get upvoted, sort of like Reddit. Again, this ties in with your Discord. And it's basically just a way to get a pulse from the community on what they want for Classic Plus. It's really kind of leaning into that OSRS idea of the community makes the game, the community drives the game. And that's typically done with surveys. So they're kind of, stepping in here, and they're like, well, Blizzard hasn't really put anything out like this yet, so we're going to take the initiative, we're going to take the opportunity and drop a website where you can kind of, answer all these surveys about the game. And I think it's a really cool thing to start off with. I haven't, covered it yet just because we've been kind of covering other things. We got the PoE League going, as you see in the background, but I think it's a great idea, and I'm super happy they made the website, and I'll probably be using this website quite a bit to help in my own videos to talk about Classic Plus topics. And we may actually even do some videos more directly about the website where we go through some of the surveys. I'll show you guys that. That'll be for maybe later videos, and we'll kind of talk about what we want. But I think mostly I'm going to use it to kind of pick out individual ideas and then discuss those ideas on the channel. It's a good source of like, hey, should this be in the game? Should this not be in the game? So it'll be really helpful to me to kind of expand that Classic Plus corner aspect of the game. And is this a good thing? Is this something that we want to see going forward in Classic Plus community? And I think it is. I think there's just a couple caveats, but by and large, I'm just happy that people are so excited and they're so interested that they are doing something like this, right? I've used the website a little bit. It doesn't seem like there's that many survey participants yet. So hopefully, as word about this website spreads around, we get kind of more, because you can't really see the results until I think after a certain number of people have voted, or maybe they're just waiting a certain amount of time to unleash the results. And that makes sense because, if you have ever done like any type of survey project or anything before, a lot of times you don't really want to release the results right away because that can sort of bias the results themselves, especially if you allow people to retake the survey, which they seem to do on this website. You can have a thing where it wipes out your answers. So what you could kind of do is you could just do the survey, put anything you want down, look at the results, and then kind of, base your results off that. And this is kind of a thing that people do in human psychology, right? If they see that the majority of people think something is a good idea, maybe they'll kind of renege on their opinion. So I understand why they are kind of blocking us from seeing the results at first. They want kind of like a genuine first impression of how many people are interested in what thing. So I think they're kind of going about things the right way. And there's definitely some interesting topics and talking points on there. The one thing is that there seems to be this, how would I say it, like a misunderstanding, I think, of how the RuneScape SRS survey system works. And, I'm not an expert here because I'm not a RuneScape player, but I have people in my Discords and stuff that I talk to that are big RuneScape enjoyers. And it seems like the impression from the classic WoW community that hasn't played RuneScape is that, they just toss a bunch of ideas out there in a survey. And then whichever ones get the most attention, kind of, they move forward with into the game. And I think it's a bit more complex than that, and that's the only kind of concern I have with this site, is that it seems very, very general so far. So basically, like, what they've done is they've kind of taken all the common questions, like, do you want flying Classic Plus? When should we get your mount? Should you have dual spec? Like, all the very common things, right? They've just tossed them into one survey and are looking for answers on all of those. And I think for the most part, it's not bad because a lot of those things are what people are kind of, we're going to have to answer most of those questions when it comes to Classic Plus. But I think sometimes when you go with this very general approach, it can be a bit difficult to really determine what we're looking for. in the game going forward, right? Because, for example, not everything that a player wants should be in the game, if that makes sense. I think that's a kind of a difficult concept for some people to understand, because they're thinking like, well, yeah, but the whole point of this is like a community project the devs are kind of making for us, right? And the whole point is that, we didn't really like the retail line, so we want to redo the line. And, why wouldn't you listen to community feedback? It doesn't make any sense. And obviously, I think that the devs and the people in charge at Blizzard, to a certain degree, they're going to want to listen to community feedback, obviously, right? They want to know what it is about WoW Classic that kind of makes players tick, so they can cater to that better. The problem is that when you look at every individual kind of notable in isolation, it can be really easy to just kind of start checking boxes and be like, oh, yeah, that sounds great, man. Yeah, that sounds great. I like that. I like the convenience of that. Oh, yeah, I really didn't like the way that the other system was so tedious, man. It was so much easier to just do things the way they did in retail. Maybe we should kind of bring that over. And you can kind of easily just kind of go one by one off the list, right? And you could actually get a game through doing something like this with the surveys, where it has way more in common with a game like retail than you would think, but the idea is that the backdrop has simply shifted. And I think that's not really what most people have in mind for Classic Plus, right? It's not so much a branch from the Dark Portal line where it's just the story, and we don't go to Outland. That's not really the main focus. You could actually go to Outland in Classic Plus, in my opinion. Now, a lot of people probably wouldn't like that idea because it just feels very similar to TBC, which is where the initial kind of diversion off the original Classic path started. Okay, but you could theoretically have a game that goes into Outland that still feels like Classic Plus if you don't add flying, if you don't do these extra things, so if you change the map a bit to accommodate that. So it's not really about, I feel like, the story or the quest so much as kind of like the game systems and how they make the player feel. And I think that what we're really trying to capture is some of that friction back from the original WoW Classic. And that's something that I feel like is kind of optimized out of every new MMO, retail included. Whenever there's kind of like a source of player friction that's not like super intentional. For example, like Mythic Raiding, for example. Blizzard is kind of okay with Mythic Raiding being in retail because you have to really go out of your way to do it. It's a super intentional place that you put yourself in, and it's kind of like almost become a tradition at this point. If they remove Mythic Raiding, that'd be like a big uproar. So they're basically fine with people like, hey, if you really want this hard experience, you can go in there. But I think that's where most of the friction stops. A lot of the other aspects of the game, whether it be like the normal dungeons or the delves and stuff like that, they're very friction averse for the most part. And I think it can be very easy when you look at these surveys to kind of let things slip in that kind of bypass those frictions or that friction. And we'll talk about it in more detail when we kind of maybe go through some of the surveys ourselves and talk about, ooh, like this sounds really convenient and this sounds nice, right? But does it actually fit with the game that we're trying to make? And I think that's the most important thing you have to keep in mind when making these kind of surveys and survey websites, right? Is that it's really easy to make a big list and the idea makes a ton of sense. It's like, okay, well, we're just going to put all this stuff on there, throw it all at the fan or at the wall, and whatever sticks, that's going to be surely what players want, what's going to make the game better. But really, you need a very coherent and full vision for the game, right? It can't really just be like, we're going to answer a bunch of survey questions, and then, we're going to make a game out of that. That's not really how it works. You need to have a consistent design philosophy behind the game, or it's going to feel really weird, right? If you start making the game, just take, for example, with a principle like item scarcity in mind, okay? Carrying that over from WoW Classic. And then, people are all on the same page, kind of. But then all of a sudden you add something like the Mythic Vault in from retail, where you're kind of giving people out gear every week at a certain time that's actually like really, really powerful gear. Then at that point, it's kind of going to contrast, and players are going to be like, well, that's a little bit weird, right? And some players might like that, and they might think, oh, I love the Vault from retail, right? Why wouldn't we bring it to Classic? But then the players who really like the scarcity aspect are going to be like, what's going on here? And, obviously not every change is going to cater to every player, but I think that finding that coherent thought process of, what do we want this game to actually be is a really important thing. And you have to be a little bit careful when we just kind of do the mass survey thing. Now, that being said, I don't think, like I said, this is an overall plus for the community, right? Because it's more important, especially at this stage, just get ideas out there, I think, and, kind of expose people to a bunch of different ideas and see what they're saying about them. That being said, I think some people have the expectation that what Blizzard is going to do is they're going to look at a site like this, or they're going to give out their own surveys that they basically model after this, and then, whatever thing gets the most upvotes is automatically going to get put in the game. And some people seem to have that impression that that's how RuneScape works. But I don't really think that's the case. Now, I'm not inside the dev's head over at Jagex, but what I imagine happens is that, they basically get ideas based on what they see in the community, but they're kind of pre-filtered by the time they get to a survey, right? So something is not going to be in a RuneScape OSRS survey that the devs kind of haven't already cleared on some level in their head themselves. So if they thought something was like really opposed to the, the fundamental fabric of OSRS, it wouldn't be included in the survey in the first place. And that makes sense, right? And I think we're going to see a very similar thing happen with WoW Classic if we do get the surveys that they were talking about in the State of Azeroth podcast, where they're going to, drop surveys, but they may not have all of the stuff that you're expecting, all of the stuff that's in this Classic Plus project here, because I think Blizzard already has a direction that they've chosen for Classic Plus, hopefully, right? Because we're probably going to get an announcement for it at BlizzCon. So if that's the case, they really hopefully have a direction nailed down already. And yeah, it's not just going to be a hodgepodge of, oh, this seems really fun in retail, or, I really like this ability, or, it was really convenient to do that. And that's just the only thing I think people should keep in mind kind of going forward and when they're even answering some of these survey questions, because it can be misleading otherwise, right? Really try and think like, this is cool in isolation, sure, but does this fit the game that we are trying to build? Okay? And those can be extremely different things because, even if you're trying in your mind to make the best version of WoW Classic that you can, and you really do like a lot of the kind of old fundamental design principles, it can be really easy. Like when you recall certain blocks of frustration that you had or something, just be like, oh man, just get that out of the game. Like that serves no purpose. Completely, who cares about that? Do the easier version. And it's kind of a trap you can fall into, because I think if you make enough of those choices, you really do start to lose, the essence of WoW Classic, which definitely has and embodies a lot of that player friction together. And that's what I've been talking about recently in terms of the dungeons and stuff like that. How, if you just allow people to dungeon farm 24/7, then, there's really no friction between other players in the game. There's no friction in players making their gold, and it creates for much more of a hollow Classic experience that I think a lot of us, want to sign up for in reality. So just something to keep in mind. Again, great website. I'll link it down in the description. There's a video that comes with it. I'll link that as well. So again, no hate or anything. It's a fantastic website. I'm going to be using it myself as a jump-off point to talk about various topics. So they did a fantastic job. Just something to keep in mind when you you go through it. Try to think about, does this fit into the overall version of Classic that I want, not just do I love this individual feature in isolation. So thank you guys for watching. If you like this, feel free to like, comment, and subscribe, and I will talk to you next time.